Well, hello there, MotoAmerica fans. This is Paul Carruthers. I'm the communications manager for MotoAmerica, and this is our weekly podcast, Off Track. I do this every week with my partner in crime, Sean Bice, and this week we're going to do it alone. Um, Boy, you're going to get lots of information, lots of opinion, whether you believe in it or not, or whether you agree with it or not. I'm sorry. We'll give it to you anyway. So, Sean, how are you today?
Hey, I'm really good. It's been Indian summer here in Central Ohio. I know we always end up talking about the weather, but I know you and I were talking the other day, and it seems like something flip-flopped with. Are you guys still getting rain out there?
No, it stopped raining, but it's clear. It's just really cold for what we're used to. Like at night, I think 39 last night or something, 40 degrees, which for us is freezing. But no, it finally cleared up. We got a lot of rain on the weekend. Well, a lot. I use some air quotes on that because it's a lot for California, but not a lot for most places in the world. But yeah, it's cleared up. It's just a bit chilly, but otherwise, perfect days.
Yeah, I mean here it's like it's a little after 4 o'clock as we record this on a Tuesday, and it's 75 degrees here in Central Ohio. I guess the entire Northeast is kind of unseasonably warm like this. Usually, obviously Halloween and thereafter, certainly moving in on Thanksgiving, it gets to be pretty cold, and you start regretting things a little bit. But sometimes it'll get like this, and I'm just real happy about it because it extends the motorcycle riding season a little more, and it's the best time of the year to ride anyway. You put a jacket on and go out, but today you don't even need a jacket. I don't look good in a tank top, but I could probably wear one and walk around and scare the neighbors, so that would be kind of cool. But yeah, I'm real happy about it, and this nice weather gives me a renewed spirit and excitement for our 2021 season. I just cannot wait for it to begin. There's so many cool things that are on the horizon for us. The fact that we managed to get through our COVID season and have 9 rounds and, all 20 of our Hono Superbike races was a pretty amazing feat. And all credit goes out to our staff and what Nicole was able to do to make that happen. It's been terrific, even though we had a couple rounds with no fans, but we did have rounds with some fans. So all in all, it was a great season with lots of great racing and a champion crowned. And with that champion crowned and moving on, that's part of the renewed spirit. I hate to get all excited about the fact that Cameron Bobier is not going to be racing with us next year, but I think he would understand that it's pretty exciting for our series with that.
Yeah, and because of COVID-19, we're obviously our championship series got pushed back, so our off season will be shorter than normal.
Yes.
If that, given the fact and based on what we saw this year, we should be able to is get the thing started, on time or as close to on time as possible, which like I said, gives us a really short off season compared to what we're used to in the past, where we don't go much past September or early September. So you bring up the championship for next year and Cameron leaving to go to Moto2. You're right. I mean, I was thinking about it earlier today. It's like it's almost like the MotoGP situation when Marquez got hurt.
Right.
Suddenly it opens the door for somebody else to step up, or like we've seen in MotoGP, where I think they've had 8 different first-time winners. It opens the door for something like that too. But what I really think it does is it just gives a whole bunch of guys a lot of hope, because now suddenly all those guys who were racing for second, in their minds, they're like, okay, Cameron's out of the picture. So basically we have a bunch of guys that are now racing for the win. So I think it'll definitely adds a little bit more intrigue to it. It's, rarely do you go into a season not, with like, okay, who's going to be Superbike champion? I mean, in the past, no matter how they did the previous year, but they've always done the previous year that was always good for them anyway. But going into a season, you always just instantly thought of Cameron and Tony Elias.
Yep.
you figured those guys were going to be there. They would do most of the winning, and those two would battle for the championship. Well, now we've lost one of those guys, and we also have one of those guys who's kind of in limbo as to what he's even going to be doing next year. So it's completely wide open.
Yeah. It's funny, Paul. Let's talk about Tony for a minute. I was going to talk about Matthew, but you bring up the thing with Tony, and I was surprised. We've done a couple of posts on social media, and when he announced that he was going to leave M4 X-Star Suzuki, it's amazing how many people, and maybe we even did, we almost misunderstood the fact that he's not retiring. He's not giving up racing. He's just wanting to try something else. And we, emphasized that point with him when we had him on our podcast when we were all together at Laguna Seca, and we had him on there. But we've done a couple of posts since then and reminded people, you won't be seeing this anymore, him on a Suzuki. So, which bike is he going to be on? And I remember he talked about I think you asked him specifically about whether it's going to be the blue bike or the red bike. And when we've done these posts, I've been kind of amazed at the number of comments people have made about, oh, really looking forward to seeing Tony race again. I thought he was all done or something. And it's just funny how people kind of draw a conclusion on that, given the fact that he is a little bit older, he's been racing a long time, but this may give him a renewed spirit too, with the playing field being wide open and him being on another bike. Let's talk about him to start with, I think, because who knows where he's going to go. We've been hearing various things. I thought maybe it was going to be Ducati. Maybe that's still going to be the case. What do you think?
Well, I think it's difficult. He, obviously he started the year so un-Tony-like. He wasn't a factor until the very end of the year. And that was just such a surprise to so many people that it was easy to just sort of forget about him.
Right.
And my worry is that people were going to forget about him as far as him getting another opportunity on a good team to race again next year. I think he just struggled with everything. I couldn't point to one bad thing or it's just impossible to figure out exactly what was wrong, but there was obviously just something wrong where he wasn't comfortable and he wanted to make a change and ride a different bike. Now, whether or not he's going to get that opportunity, we don't know. But I think people tend to write him off. And I think writing him off is a big mistake. I think a lot of people wrote him off and they probably have unwritten him off after Laguna Seca because he came back and was on the podium in all three races. And he looked a lot like the Tony of old. And, if Cameron wasn't there, he would have had, I don't know if he was a couple of wins and a second or whatever, but I just don't think, like, when you look at his body of work, I think last year he won, maybe 8 races. I just don't think you win 8 races one year and then you forget how to win and you're not capable of winning, 6 months later. I just don't think it happens like that.
Yeah. I also wonder how much of a disadvantage it was for us not to go to COTA to start the year, because we know how dominant he always starts the year at that track and on a Suzuki. Maybe we'll of course never know. He was on a brand new sort of new bike for him with a new team. So was it beneficial that he didn't have to go to that track that, he's sort of the one that's predestined to win it possibly? Or was it kind of a bad thing that maybe he could have gotten a better start to his season if he had gone there? But that kind of conspired to change the way his season was too, and maybe affected his confidence in the beginning. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, confidence plays such a big role in these guys. Who knows if he would have gone to COTA and had a really good weekend, things could have been different. He could have gone to COTA and had a really bad weekend, and things even been worse. I don't know. It's just he just didn't seem to have that confidence until the very end of the season. So, as far as, people only remember your last race or your last couple of races, he did himself some favors by having a good weekend at Laguna. I just can't imagine if you had a spot on your team that he wouldn't be highly considered for that spot, just based on the fact that there's not a lot of guys in our series that have won Superbike races. And him and Cameron have won the most, and he's won a shit ton of races. And again, I don't think that's something you forget how to do.
Yeah.
Admittedly, he's a little bit older, but I mean, he showed at the last race that he's still perfectly capable of doing lap times.
And he's also shown his versatility throughout his career that he can kind of be on anything, whether it's a Moto2 bike, MotoGP bike, super bike, you know, in the beginning of his career, a smaller displacement bike too. He carries a lot of corner speed. It almost in some ways doesn't matter what he rides. He can be fast. He's always, I think, liked Yamaha as a brand because of how he felt about Wayne in his career and had raced for Yamaha in the past. You know, there's an opening there. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure if that would happen where he'd fill in that seat that was vacated by Cameron on the attack team or not. That could be interesting. The other part of it with Tony is, I mean, he's been around a while. He's done a lot of winning, and he's also collected a few paychecks and also has some clout with some brands. And I wonder if he went to a team, would he be able to bring in anything in terms of value from a brand or value from, you know, what he's made for money? I mean, could he partly own a team? I don't know. I don't know how much he's got in reserve there, but you know, somebody that's been around like as long as him, you'd think that he's got some resources there that he can lean on to kind of put himself on a team and sweeten the pot a little bit. Would you think that's true?
Yeah, I would think there's a lot of possibilities there. I mean, he might also be at a point in his career. I don't know what his financial situation is like, but I don't think he can be too bad off. Maybe he's the type that would, you know, maybe take a smaller salary and push the contract more towards bonus money, to, you know, give these guys, to show these guys that he's not just collecting a paycheck, that he thinks he can actually win and do the business. There could be some sponsors that he could maybe bring to a team that somebody else couldn't bring. So yeah, I think you're right there. I mean, who really knows? And I mean, nobody knows what other people what they have going on in their lives. I mean, I know he's had a difficult year, you know, from a personal standpoint with,
Right.
you know, the new baby, and he's got his young son, and he's adapting to all those things, being a father, to, you know, there was a lot going on in his life last year, and whether that had an effect on him or didn't, I mean, I have no idea, but at least it's something to think about. It's something to consider because he did have a lot of changes go on in his life. So
Yeah, you know, it's I'd forgotten kind of that, but you're right. There were a couple of race weekends where there were things going on with him that it was almost like, how does he put even some of that stuff behind him? You know, I think when he got the podium at Indy, right? He got the podium there. Seemed like there was a lot of drama going on in his life, but it maybe fueled him to kind of forget about it and you know, concentrate on his riding. Got better for him and stuff, but it's just, he's definitely going to be a factor in where some of these rides end up, and there are quite a few of them out there. You know, Bobby, I think we can assume probably that Bobby Fong is going to continue with M4 X-Star Suzuki next year, and Team Hammer, I mean, after winning a championship for him the year before in Super Sport, winning 3 races this year, and by all accounts having a pretty amazing year in spite of, you know, Cameron Bobier's dominance. I mean, he did win the second most Superbike races out there, and he technically isn't really a Superbike rookie. I lost track of the fact that a few years ago he was in Superbike on a Kawasaki. He also did some Superstock 1000 and Stock 1000 racing within Superbike, but it felt like this year in some ways was a little bit of a rookie season for him, I think, because he was finally on a truly top to bottom Superbike with one of the major teams in the paddock. So all things considered, he really did a great job this year in his season, and hopefully is going to continue that for being the lead rider for that M4 X-Star Suzuki team next year in 2021.
yeah, again, I would imagine that he would stay put. But you know, he's also increased his value tenfold over where it was a year ago. I don't know what kind of money he makes, and it's none of my business, but whatever he was making, I would think he'd be in line for a hell of a lot more than what that was, based on the fact that, yeah, he proved this year that he's capable of winning Superbike races. And like we started the show talking about Tony, And I mentioned then, it's like there's not a lot of guys that have actually won races.
Right.
And now he's one of them, and he's won multiple times. So he hasn't been a one race wonder or anything like that. But I would think he's put himself in a pretty good position to either stay where he is or negotiate with another team. So.
Yeah, and another one that's won race is one of the few that has. And I was going to start out by talking about Matthew Skoltz, only because when we did our podcast last week with Cam Peterson, he reminded me that, oh, I need to check in with Matthew. I hadn't talked to him since Indy, really, and I wanted to find out not only how he was doing, but also what he thought of having Nicola Canepa on his bike. And there were a couple of things that were funny, little bits of information from Matthew. First of all, Matthew thought probably Canepa was going to do better than he did, and you could tell was kind of happy that he didn't do any better than the 6th place finishes that he had, which I mean are decent. I'm not saying it's not good, and he gave the team a lot of input, but it was funny to hear Matthew basically go, well, there you go. I think that kind of proves my worth on that team. It's just funny how these guys are. And the other thing that he told me is, all this year, I know you probably thought the same thing, Paul, but we're watching these races, and with the coverage on TV, a lot of times you don't see Cameron Beaubier, because he was way up the road and headed towards the win, so they started focusing further back. Matthew got a fair amount of camera coverage because he was battling a lot of times with Jake Gagne or Kyle Wyman, some of the guys a little bit further back, and Matthew got a lot of runner-up finishes this year, as well as being on the podium a hell of a lot during the season. And I thought to myself, okay, with Cameron not being there, it's almost like Matthew is sort of leading this race of the other guys. And at the time during the season, we didn't know what Cameron was going to do. But now that we think back at that, and you think if you took Cameron out of the equation, all these races, Cameron would have won. And Bobby Fong battling with him up front too, who we just talked about. I didn't mean to not mention him. But, it's funny that Matthew talking to him, he thought the same thing. I didn't think a rider would feel that way, but he actually kind of forgot about Cameron a lot of times in those races, because he's thinking about who he's racing against, of course. But he also kind of felt like, I'm kind of the leader of all the other guys out here. So you fast forward to this year, and he's got to be an odds-on favorite to be one of the guys to win a lot of races, if not the championship, don't you think?
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, I also understand, like, I don't blame him at all. If I was him and I'm sitting at home with a broken leg and I'm watching a guy ride my bike, I'm hoping like hell the guy doesn't do very well. I mean, you'd have to be insane not to, because these guys are constantly under threat of being replaced.
Right.
I mean, most of us go to work every day, and we don't have to worry about somebody outperforming us that day and potentially just taking our job. I mean, that's just not how regular businesses work. They can be competitive, but they're not to the point of like these guys actually, most of them, I think he's an exception because I think he was on a 2-year deal, right? Or did he sign just to sign again?
He was at the end of his deal, and he did sign a deal again.
Okay.
So
yeah.
After he got hurt, they made sure that they got him signed up.
That's right. I remember the press release now. But I mean, what you have to understand with these guys, a lot of them are just year to year, and
right.
And talk about a job where it's just strictly results based. I mean, racing a motorcycle, it's like, yeah, I don't blame him at all. If I was at home, there was no way I would have wanted that Italian guy to come over here and do well. I mean, you want the team to do well, you want them to enjoy the experience, but you only want them to enjoy the experience and have a good race if it's below the level that you've been giving them all year. And that's exactly how it panned out. So it panned out well for him because it just showed how valuable he is to that team and how good of a motorcycle racer he is. And you'd have to consider him going into next season as one of the favorites. And you also, we talked a little bit earlier about how wide open this thing could be. There's also, I got to caution you a little bit, there's also that possibility that one of them really steps up.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's going to happen, but you see it a lot. Like that one guy just says like, hey, this is mine and I'm going to make it mine from the beginning. And he takes a couple of steps that the other guys don't take. And then suddenly, he's the next Cameron Beaubier. And I could see something like that happening. And that could be somebody like Matthew. that
Yep.
makes that jump. Or else it is like MotoGP this year, where it seemed like, until very recently with Joan Mir, it seemed like nobody was making that jump. Nobody was going after it. Nobody wanted it. I'm sure they all wanted it, but nobody was doing that extra bit to get it until now. So that could happen in our series too. I mean, from a personal standpoint, a selfish standpoint, I would love nothing more than for 5 or 6 of those guys to win races and battle the entire time. But that doesn't always work out that way.
Yeah, this is okay. So I'm gonna wax a little bit, not poetic, but maybe a little novelish right now, if that's a term. But the idea of a tale of two cities. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was obviously the best of times for Cameron Beaubier this year, and it wasn't the worst of times for Jake Gagne. But man, he had a lot of bad luck this year, and he just had so many weird things happening, whether it was his clutch or something electronic or something with tires, this, that, and the other thing. And it seemed so odd that team would have, of all, it seemed like they had these gremlins, and the gremlins would always happen to poor Jake. And you got to hand it to the guy. He kept his chin up. He's that sort of guy anyway. But to your point about, he's on arguably one of the best teams in the paddock. If they get that stuff cleaned up this next year, and maybe him being elevated to the #1 rider, and he'll be back because it'll be the second year of his contract with Yamaha. He may be that guy that becomes completely dominant next year, with getting all this stuff out of the way, if they can do it. But wasn't it strange for Jake? I mean, so heart-wrenching in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, he had his issues, but then we just got to remember, like, if you were just basing it solely on looking at this year, if Cameron wasn't here, he'd be champion. So
that's true. Yeah.
He's no matter what happened along the way, he established himself, at least in the championship, as the second best guy. So if you're just looking strictly at that, you'd have to say that he's the favorite when the first race starts next year.
Yeah, and I mean, that it's so cool about that. I mean, a guy that, obviously has had a pretty amazing career and is still pretty young, but what he was able to do in Super Sport, Daytona Sport Bike and Super Sport, what he was able to do in Stock 1000 and finally getting this ride with Yamaha's team and being reacclimated again with Yamaha and had a great season, except for those gremlins and things that he had. And you're right. If you look at it on paper, it's a lot better than you think about the problems he had. And I'm probably belaboring that a little bit too much, but man, if they can clean that up, and it's just that little extra to get him where he needs to be, he could be completely dominant. But again, it's like, there's Bobby, there's Matthew Skoltz, Kyle Wyman had his best season ever this year. He was on the podium a couple of times and had some struggles in the middle of the season, seemed to have it figured out this next year. And with what was going on with that other Ducati team, Celtic HSBK Racing, and bringing Lorenzo Zanetti, I know Kyle is going to be very, very motivated to get out there and show even more. I had somebody actually ask me the other day if I thought he was still going to be, racing a Ducati. And I just think there's no question he would be, just by virtue of the sheer investment he's made in that brand. Wouldn't you say that he's going to continue?
Well, yeah, I would think he would continue on the same path that he's on now, unless there was one of those teams that wanted to take a shot at Kyle Wyman.
True.
I think he enjoys doing it the way that he's doing it now, where he's the team owner and he chooses the bikes. He's the boss of the team in addition to racing the motorcycle. But I also know there's a big part of him that would like nothing else but to fly into a race and on Thursday make sure that his visors are clean and his leathers are clean and ready to go, and doesn't have to think about much else. Because I know that he believes that, and I do too. I mean, there has to be lap time to be found in not owning the shit that you could potentially crash, if that makes sense.
Right.
Like it's just different for him. I know it is. And I don't even know that he would argue it, but I mean, when he crashes a bike, when we're sitting in the media center and we see him crash a bike, I know you're thinking the same thing I am. It's like, oh man, I hope the bike's not too messed up.
Right.
Because I'm just thinking of him thinking, he's watching that thing cartwheel through the kitty litter and all he's seen is, Visa bills.
Yeah.
So I think if he had the opportunity to go to a team and be a factory rider, or as factory as we have at this point, I think he would take that. But to answer your original question, if he comes back in a team owner role, I think he's got exactly what he wants. I mean, he's got his new big truck, he's got his bikes, he's got everything in order to get a further jump. You saw how quickly he started this year off with a full off season behind him, whereas the year before was such a rush job. So you saw that he started on the right foot, had some issues in the middle, and kind of finished on the right foot too. So I think he would pick up and go straight into next year if he's in his existing situation, ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, I think if he hadn't have broken the bike in half, where with that crash at Ridge, that was crazy. I mean, for that swing arm to have happened what it did, and some other little things that he had along the year. But you're right. It's like you think a rider takes crashing personally. Well, boy, he sure does take it personally. I think we're a ways away from it. But you think about him and also about David Anthony. I wonder. You expect probably these two guys are probably going to be maybe team owners at some point down the road. And if not team owners, maybe principals involved in teams because they've managed teams so long. But I often wonder, and I'm not saying if, for Kyle and Aussie Dave listening here, if they do, I certainly am not saying you guys need to hand it on to a younger rider, but it just seems like there's going to come a time where these guys may be having a rider that rides for their team. And they've got such a solid infrastructure built that it'll be interesting to see as we go on and as MotoAmerica develops even more who that might be. And, it could be a rider we don't even know about yet because they haven't even arrived on the scene yet. But it's really cool that, like, for Kyle, and again with Aussie Dave, the fact that they're doing this stuff, it's only going to help them in the future. It's only going to help us in the future too, to have more people that have a familiarity and understanding with how to build a team and keep it going through a season. So that's another aspect of it that I look forward to a lot. And, same thing, this situation that we went through the year before last year with everybody thinking, oh my God, Yamaha factory is gone, Yoshimura, Suzuki, all that kind of stuff. Well, we had a pretty darn good season, and it for all intents and purposes, except for the way things went with COVID and all that, it looked pretty much the same. I mean, it was Cameron dominating more than he had because Garrett wasn't around and Bobby Fong stepped up. But for the most part, it seemed like a lot of the season showed you wouldn't know it. You wouldn't really know that those teams are not, and they still are connected to their respective factories, of course, as is Kyle and as is Celtic HSBK Racing. They showed how much they're connected to Ducati with getting Lorenzo Zanetti to come in, and with what Zanetti did at the end of the year, I fully expect him to be back next year with that team. Do you think that's going to happen, Paul?
I would imagine. I think it comes down to those guys, at the end of the season, they were talking about having 2 bikes in the series next year. I think if there's 2 bikes in the series next year, I can't imagine him not having a very good shot at riding one of those.
Right.
I think they were talking about, a foreign rider and an American rider, whether he would fit the bill as being the foreign rider, or if they would classify a Tony as the foreign rider. I think these days, I don't think anybody actually categorizes Tony as a foreign rider anymore. I think they would just consider him as he could fit right in as the American on that team,
Yeah.
But yeah, and then back to the start of this little conversation was about the fact that not much changed for the series, not having that direct factory involvement that they'd had in the past. And, we were all worried about that, and the fans were all up in arms, and we spent a lot of time on social media, defending it or talking about it at least. And really it was much ado about nothing because, they all went faster than they'd ever gone before. Cameron has lap records at every single track, and he just got to the point where this was just his time. I mean, you've seen it before, where a guy just suddenly takes a step to the next level that the other guys don't take. And Cameron took that step, and it worked out really well with him, with Richard, and the electronics package that he was able to put into Cameron's bike. And his confidence just grew and grew and grew to the point where I think the confidence that he built this year and the success that he had this year is what allowed him to talk himself into the fact that he should leave and go to Europe. If he would have had another year where he wasn't dominant, maybe he won the championship and won half the races and somebody else won half, I think he'd still question himself that maybe it wasn't the time to go. But I think this year just firmly showed him and everybody else that's like, okay, this guy is 100% ready to go. And if he goes there and he's not successful, then he would have never been successful there. I mean,
That's
it's
right.
like there's no better time than now. And then now he just has to go over there and then do what he can do. And I mean, I'm very confident in his abilities. I'm very confident in the way that he knows how to race a motorcycle. I think he's more than happy to get his elbows out and push his way through when he needs to. So yeah, I think it's, there's nothing about MotoGP I don't like. I watch the races religiously, mostly live, even if it requires me getting up at 5 a.m. And I think it's going to be awesome to have Cameron in that series with Joe Roberts. And I think it's going to make the popularity of the series even bigger in the US, and that's going to help everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think about the year in 2009 when Ben Spies was winning all those races in World Superbike. That was, for me, I think the most interested I ever was in World Superbike, and I'm still interested. But I mean, I just hung on every moment, and certainly it's going to be like that with Cameron. Joe Roberts has been that way too for us, but Cameron on that team, and it's just raising the awareness of that. What Garrett did this year in World Superbike made us more interested, I think, than ever before in that series. So it's just nice to see that, and it's of course great that it's what we've wanted. It's the formula of MotoAmerica to get these riders on a world stage, and it's so cool to be able to see that and then have them go over there and do some stuff. I mean, my gosh, what Garrett Gerloff did last weekend was incredible. And I was thinking, we didn't even talk about this, Paul, but the mechanical problem that Rossi had, it was almost kind of good. I mean, that Garrett didn't get out in that race and have the disappointment of having the bike break or something like what happened to Rossi. But it kind of was a perfect weekend for him to kind of go in and show what he could do in the time he had in sketchy conditions, and then, hand the keys to the kingdom back over to the GOAT and watch from afar, and then kind of look at it and go, well, the bike may have broken for me too. So, maybe they'll call on me next time or in the future. So
yeah. Looking at that whole thing for Garrett, I don't think anything could have been more perfect than the way that it was. Even though he wanted to race the bike, he wanted more time on the bike. I think the way that it all played out was just perfect, because it's like they got a taste of Garrett Gerloff that makes them want more Garrett Gerloff, if that makes any sense. It's like you get a little bit of ice cream, but then you don't give them any more. The next day they want twice. They want that ice cream again. And I think Garrett teased them enough where he didn't make any mistakes. He was very fast. They couldn't, from top to bottom in that paddock, nobody could speak more highly of somebody than what they were speaking of Garrett by Friday night or Saturday. He got an incredible amount of publicity, and every single bit of it was good. Now he can go back and have a good season of World Superbike. And I have a feeling that he will get a phone call at the end of next year that will possibly put him in MotoGP. And most of that has just come from the impression that he made on everybody, on that Friday in Spain last week. And so I think it was absolutely ideal the way that it played out, even to the fact that I wanted to see him race. I know he wanted to race, but it's almost kind of cool that he didn't get to go any farther than what he did, because not that he would have made any mistakes, but it didn't even give him the opportunity to ruin perfection, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, so when at Laguna Seca, when Cameron Bobier had, they gave Cameron his going away gift, Yamaha, with the plaque to commemorate what he had done for that brand and on that team, and then he signed the contract with American Racing. And afterwards, I had asked him, do you think that this is a more direct path going through Moto2. And, you know, he didn't deny the fact that he wanted to race in World Superbike. That was what he wanted to do, but it just, the doors started closing and this one opened, and it seems like a pretty direct path. You're only one notch below MotoGP. But then I got to thinking about guys who have gone from World Superbike into MotoGP, and it hasn't happened a lot. I mean, you think about, you know, obviously Johnny Ray comes up as one to think about. It hasn't happened a lot lately, I should say. It has in the past, obviously, but it's kind of funny because to your point, I really think for Garrett to cross over to MotoGP, show what he could do, he's absolutely in line to have something happen with MotoGP and with Yamaha, and probably, I don't know, probably sooner than maybe even Cameron again. I don't know, but for both those guys, their stock is very high right now on the world stage.
Well, I think it just goes to show that you never know. If you would have told me at the beginning of this year that Garrett was going to go and have a World Superbike season like he had, I would have said 100%. That's sort of along the lines of what I expected. I thought by the end of the year, he'd be fighting for, if not on podiums. And he did that. If you would have told me that he would have been suddenly hot property in the MotoGP paddock, I would have been like, okay, no. He's going to have a really good second year of World Superbike to get noticed. But it just goes to show what a guy who's put himself in the right position. He had the right sponsors. He was in the right country. He was just it was the perfect case scenario for that guy to get a shot at something that he may never have gotten a shot for. And he took perfect advantage of it. And now you look at him as potentially in 2 years being in MotoGP based on what he did in one day of riding. So it's really cool. But I think back to what you were saying originally, it's like, yeah, is Moto2 a more direct path to MotoGP? I think it is. And that's just based on, you know, every year you see, you know, two, sometimes three. Right. Yeah, you see two or sometimes three of the top Moto2 guys go right to MotoGP, where you're not seeing that from World Superbike. So it's easy to deduct that that's how it works. And I think that could be, you know, that's obviously the path that we are all hoping, and that Cameron's hoping for from him, is that he does really well in Moto2 and gets a shot at MotoGP. I mean, how crazy would it be if in a couple of years both those guys are in MotoGP? I mean, we'd be losing our freaking minds, because there's nothing like, for you and I, for example, it's even more so because we've known those guys forever, and you know, we consider them friends. But even just to be able to watch, if you're an American, to be able to watch an American that you've seen race all these years and have somebody to actually like feel like you're on the bike with them, you know what I mean? Like there's a connection there. I think that's just a great feeling that we've just lacked, you know, back to the days of, you know, Kenny Roberts Jr. or after that Ben Spies, where you actually, you know, there's a guy that you're watching, even if he's in 10th place, you're staring at the screen counting spots to see where he is. And right. it makes a huge difference, and it just makes it so much more fun than watching a bunch of guys that you don't really have any kind of connection for. You have respect for them, but you don't have any of that connection.
Yeah, that's right. Hey, I want to transition back to MotoAmerica again and talk about a rider that we haven't mentioned, one of the Superbike riders. And there's a lot of unknowns going into this next season with him, and it's Josh Herrin. And the reason I want to bring him up specifically is for some reason, Steve Scheibe gets in touch with me a fair amount. He says that it's when he's got windshield time, and it took him a long time to get back home from Laguna Seca. He had some mechanical problems and all kinds of things. So he was talking quite a bit about, you know, what's going to happen, and he's sort of waiting to see what Josh Herrin is going to do. And Steve has openly admitted he kind of has to look at what sort of Yamaha, what Attack's going to do, and then what Team Hammer M4 X-Star Suzuki is going to do, and then sort of see where he's at for the playing field among riders. And Steve's had a lot of different riders on that team. Obviously, he's had Jake Gagne, he had Danny Eslick, he had Sylvain Berrier a few years ago, and you know, he's had a fair number of riders, but he had a good season, all things considered, with Josh Herrin this year. But Josh never really seemed to be fully committed to the team. I think he was committed to the bike and committed to trying to do as best as he could with it. But it almost seemed like he was either looking over his shoulder or looking ahead to see what the next thing was going to be. And it may not be that he goes somewhere else. I think a lot of people have positioned him for that second Yamaha ride just because he is a former Yamaha Superbike champion and has a lot of history with Yamaha. But there again, you go, it's not the factory anymore, although he did race for Richard Stamboli, so he's got that connection too. Or is he going to stay with Scheibe again this year? Steve has talked about the possibility of getting the new bike. He didn't want to, he said the new S1000RR, the one that was before this M model, he liked it, but he kind of said that this M model that they came out with is the one that he was really hoping to have. And he's made some strides with BMW, both in the US and in Munich, and, wants to get, I think he's finally at the stage where he wants to get the newer bike. So that could be an attraction to Herrin or another rider there. And he's probably going to have a decent rider, but I just wonder, what's going to happen. It's interesting that Josh Herrin and Tony Elias were teammates on Yoshimura Suzuki, and now they're both, for different reasons, maybe going to be out there looking for other rides. For sure, Tony is, and it looks like Herrin is kind of trying to see what's going to go on too. Do you think, I just got to flat out ask you, do you think that Herrin's going to be Jake Gagne's teammate next year?
I kind of have that feeling.
So do I.
It's not really based on anything, but it's a pretty good feeling. I've heard some sponsorship issues, some sponsorship stuff. One of the potential sponsors being one of Herrin's big sponsors. I would, if a press release came across my desk tomorrow that said that he was going to be on the second Yamaha, I wouldn't be shocked. With that being said, I wish Steve would get a new bike.
Yes.
He knows more about motorcycles than I ever will. He's forgotten more about the engineering part and the mechanical part of motorcycle racing than I'll ever know. But I do know motorcycle racing, and I can tell you he needs to get a new motorcycle just to enhance the overall look and feel and make his team more available to different riders. Because excuse me, what he is now and what he may always be is he's the team that the guy who doesn't get the factory ride turns to get a ride.
Yes.
And I think that he could elevate himself above just that role if he got new equipment and I think he knows what he's doing. Actually, I know he knows what he's doing, and he's got himself a nice little team, but I think they're just beating a dead horse to a point where, if they started with something fresh and they put in the same amount of energy and the same amount of effort and work, that I think they would have more success. And with more success, I feel bad for him because he gets a rider, and the rider, it's like halfway through the year. I never understand how you can have a job and openly be talking about, God, I hope I get this other job while still in the job that you have. You know what I mean? It'd be like me saying, oh man, I hope I get that Dorna freaking marketing, that communications job at Dorna. That's my dream, is to just go work for Dorna right while I'm in the middle of working for MotoAmerica. I just don't understand how that works. But I think with professional athletes at this level, I mean, obviously you can get away with it because, you know your value and you know what you're capable of getting or what have you. But I've obviously made a long story longer, but yeah, I think Josh Herrin could end up at Yamaha, and I wish Steve Scheibe would get himself a new bike because I think it would elevate his team in the paddock.
Well, I mean, you think about Celtic HSBK Racing. I mean, of course they they got a course bike, a true super bike, and a quality rider. And, you know, they were doing fine with stock 1000. I mean, they had their issues with the whole thing with PJ and what happened with his burns that he sustained in the crash and all that. But that instantly elevated that team. I mean, for them to, you know, be on the podium and win a race and everything that was going on there, it was like, if to your point, if they got a bike that was a little bit more pointier on the sharp end and was up front more, he'd get a lot more credibility for sure. And it's a massive investment. It's huge. I mean, the cost, especially the MSRP of that M1000 RR versus like a brand new 2020 you know, R1 or 2021 R1, there's a huge discrepancy in price there. It's obviously an expensive motorcycle, but he chooses to follow that because he likes to be sort of the other guy with that other bike. I kid him sometimes and say, okay, I understand your last name's German, but you know, you used to be a Harley guy. So what's with this penchant for having German motorcycles? He goes, I don't know. I just like them. So let's hope, yeah, to your point, he gets a new one. He gets a good rider on there and does some damage this year. It'd be nice to see, because this is, if not 2021, then I don't know what year. As we've said, it's going to be, I think, one of the greatest years ever in MotoAmerica's history, not to mention recent history of AMA Superbike for sure.
Yeah, and the Celtic HSBK guys, I mean, they spent the money.
Yep.
They did the full spend. They got the full factory treatment that you pay for, and that you're able to pay for when you make the purchase on the motorcycle. They did everything that they needed to do. They feel or felt, I think they feel that they potentially already have it. They have a big sponsor on the line, and they knew that if they spent that money, put in the effort, and went to those last three races with a rider that they thought could do the job, that they could make it so that sponsor would have a difficult time saying no. Whether or not that's happening for them right now, I have no idea. But I mean, they did exactly what they needed to do. They came in and they got podiums and they got a victory, and they showed what the bike's capable of, what that team's capable of, and you know, hopefully they come through and get the sponsor and have two bikes on the grid next year, because it's just, you know, that'd be a big thing for our series.
Yeah, it'd be really good, and I can hardly wait. And like you said, it's going to be a pretty short off season by comparison. And it looks like I think didn't MotoGP put out their provisional calendar that did have COTA on it? Is that right, or was that?
No, they did.
Yeah,
they had COTA on there in April.
Yeah.
And that's obviously a round that we would go to if MotoGP does go. And I mean that's not that far away, considering how the world is still with COVID, you know?
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, with that for sure. Yeah.
I think they showed much like us that they're capable of putting on a championship, but they also showed that they're capable of putting on a championship that's held within Europe, because I think the international travel, all the people and equipment that they're moving around, just makes it very difficult for them to do international, you know, overseas events. But again, that's just going to come down to, I think, you know, what the situation is worldwide with the pandemic.
Yeah. I know we've been on a while. We're going to have to wrap this up, but one of the things, this is talking about COVID, not really about racing too much, but I heard somebody say something today, and I think you'll probably identify with this too. It seemed like 2020 consisted of the longest month of March that had ever happened, and then suddenly here we are in November. It was like we were all trying to figure out what's going to happen next last spring, and then before you know it, we're through the summer. We have a whole season, and here we are at the end of the year, hoping for a vaccine and to get 2021 started off with non-COVID and just go back to normal and being regular. So it's just funny how that perception is.
No, you're totally right. It's like, I remember, you know, just being stuck at home in March, and we had it easier than most of the world,
right?
That we weren't locked down for, you know, what must have seemed like forever for them. But I remember wanting to get a haircut so badly, and I couldn't get a haircut. And then now it seems like, oh my God, I got to get another haircut. You know what I mean? So it's like, it just kind of shows like you just how how different things are. And it also just makes me realize, looking back on it, that we were able to do what we did with this season. Everybody got to keep their jobs. Everybody in the paddock were able to work. The riders were able to race. Careers were advanced because of what we were able to accomplish at our series. And to think that there was the potential for none of that to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, I was seriously worried going into the year with the pandemic. And I even brought this up to Garrett Gerloff, and I probably shouldn't have. I'm like, what happens if, like, you know, you lose this year in your career? I mean, these guys don't have long careers.
Right.
Garrett Gerloff could have potentially lost his first year of competing in the World Superbike Championship, which would have set him back an entire year. And look how his year turned out because of the fact that they were able to race. And look at how Cameron Beaubier's life has potentially changed because he was able to race in MotoAmerica this year. And if none of that would have happened, we would have been starting this coming year with, like, who knows what would have been in our laps, you know? But to think of how well it turned out in such horrible times, I mean, it's something to be proud of. And obviously Richard Varner and the other partners, Wayne and Chuck and Terry, I mean, they play a huge role in making sure that it was like, no matter what, as long as everyone can stay healthy, we're going to get through this championship, and we're going to make it the best championship we can possibly make it. And that's exactly how it turned out. And if you start digging deep into this whole thing and seeing how people's lives would have been different, it's a great thing that everything worked out and fell into place the way that it did.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. We're going to look back at this year, 2020, in years ahead, and just think about, wow, that's incredible how that happened. I mean, like I said at the top of the podcast, you know, we did end up with 9 rounds and 20 full Superbike races this year, and all the races were scheduled and run in all of our other classes. Plus, we had Mini Cup and King of the Baggers and Heritage Cup. We actually added a lot to our program and are going to have even more stuff next year that we're excited to talk about. So. Yeah, all things considered, it was an amazing year. And we can't deny there was some luck involved, but there was also a lot of hard work by a lot of people and some determination as well along the way. So, and a bunch of great riders that were committed to, being the best they could be. So it was a good year for sure.
Yeah, unbelievable, really, when you think about it, because not much else went right in the world, but we were able to get it done and get it done well. So,
yeah. Hey, so I think we're pretty much at the end here. I usually do a little bit of a wrap up and try to get people to, subscribe to MotoAmerica Live Plus. But what we're trying to get people to do now is just go to our MotoAmerica channel on YouTube. Just go to YouTube, and there's a lot of races on there that we're putting up on that channel, and great chance for people to watch races in their entirety. And you can keep watching racing all off season long leading into next year. And it's funny to look back. We were doing some posts today about the 2017 season, and I started looking back at those results, and I was like, wow, that's only a few years ago, but it's amazing how much things have changed and advanced, and who was doing what back then. And it's just funny. It's fun to have an archive of races and historical significance within our series in only 6 short years. So that's one of the things I just wanted to get in there. Just, tell the fans, have you fans out there thanks for listening to this podcast, but also definitely go to our YouTube channel, MotoAmerica's YouTube channel, and check out all the racing that we have there that you can look at whenever you like. So.
Awesome. Well, good job today, Sean. And, we'll get a guest on here next week and have at it with those guys. But in the meantime, enjoy the rest of your week and your weekend, and we'll chat again soon.
Sounds good, Paul. Thank you.